Mark Ward, in the financial crisis, are you worried about the particular situation of Afghanistan? Because obviously it involves military operations, which are expensive, but also it's a very poor country, which requires a lot of aid.
Actually, I think we can use the financial crisis around the world to our advantage to remind donor countries that they have to use their assistance dollars, euros, yen, rupees, much more effectively, so that the money they are providing to the country goes farther. So it's actually helped us a little bit to make some key points about aid effectiveness.
And in what way can aid be more effective?
The classic example is, who do you hire to do the work? 7 years ago, when the donor community came back to Afghanistan, there was no Afghan capacity to do anything. Countries were in a hurry to get started because of pressure from their capitals, so they got started with what they could, and they imported everything. It's 7 years later. Afghan firms can do a lot of the work, but still a lot of the donor countries insist on importing everything. The money will go a lot further, and the money will be used a lot more effectively if these donor countries start hiring Afghan firms to get the work done.
And you're confident there's a sufficient skills base for this to happen?
I'm confident that we should begin to give the Afghans a chance. And over time, as with any program of capacity building, it's going to incrementally get better. We should not award an Afghan firm a $100 million project tomorrow. But we can award an Afghan firm a $10 million contract tomorrow, and then let them work towards doubling their capacity and doubling the size of the contract that they can manage.
Bill Bird, can you tell me what impact the financial crisis could have directly on some of the poorest countries in the world?
Well, I think there's several transmission mechanisms. One is many of these countries are dependent on natural resources or commodity exports, and the prices of those goods crashing certainly makes their life more difficult. Some of the poor and conflict-affected and fragile countries are actually dependent on oil exports, so the earlier sharp decline in oil prices has also hurt them badly. Some of them are aid dependent, some are dependent on remittances. And I think another point which is really important is that many of these countries are in a weakened situation even from the beginning. So to start with, so they have weaker institutions and policies and are less able to address and deal with the effect of the crisis on them than, say, some of the middle-income countries or some of the stronger low-income countries. So they're starting out from a weaker position, and in different ways, different countries can be affected by the crisis. And of course, if aid flows get cut sharply, that will also have an effect on many of these countries.
And a lot of post-conflict countries actually lapse back into conflict. Do you think the financial crisis could be a trigger for that to happen?
Certainly it's a possibility in some countries. I mean, the constellation of these issues and these vulnerabilities is different for each country. Some of the African countries are oil exporters and are really suffering. Southern Sudan is an example where this may be a problem. Some of the other countries have other natural resource dependencies. Mineral prices, copper and others, have declined sharply. This will affect them. Still others don't have many of these kind of exports, but on the other hand are dependent on aid. And again, a reduction in aid could affect them differently. And since some of these factors are drivers of conflict, certainly one couldn't rule out the possibility that it might precipitate conflict and security problems. On the other hand, I don't think we should take it for granted that would happen. For one thing, there's some things that can be done to ameliorate the situation, and you know, for each country, the tipping point of when these problems get so severe that they go into conflict could be different. But certainly those that have been in conflict and are still suffering from conflict are especially at risk.
Which do you see as the greatest potential danger for security that could come out of this financial crisis?
I don't think about it as being an economist. I don't think about it so much in security terms. I would pose, in terms of economic risks, let me sort of take the question in a slightly different perspective, I think that what we've seen over the last several decades is a period of increasingly outwardly oriented policies, the so-called globalization, and I think that one of my concerns would be that there'll be a pullback from some of those things. I think that would be the wrong lesson to take away from the crisis. Certainly, globalization has played a role in terms of the propagation. We've seen it in terms of how widely this crisis has spread and how synchronized the global downturn has been. But at the same time, that should not overshadow all the benefits that globalization has brought. The challenge for us will be how to manage the risks of globalization while tapping into its enormous benefits. And what I'd like to see, obviously, is policies moving in a direction consistent with that, rather than a retrenchment away from globalization, which I think ultimately would do more to harm the global economy in the long run.
Do you think that there's a danger of greater protectionism with this environment?
That is definitely one of our risks, key risks as we see it. History has certainly shown that at times when the economy is weak, when unemployment is high or rising, and those are very much the conditions that we face at present, that is sort of the conditions, the setting for many countries to turn towards more insular policies. That's certainly what our own work has done, has shown, and we certainly are concerned that there will be a kind of retrenchment from some of the policies which we think have been by and large successful in promoting an increase in global growth and improving global welfare. So from that standpoint, we certainly are pushing quite forcefully that countries not resort to types of protectionist measures, both with respect to trade policies and with respect to labor policies, for example, with respect to remittances and labor migration type issues, and that in the end, we think that the global economy's resilience is enhanced when trade is more open than when it's less open.